You ever wonder what America's presidents really ate behind those White House doors? Not the fancy banquet stuff. I mean the private meals they asked for when the cameras were gone and the weight of the whole country sat on their shoulders. Because here's the crazy part. Some of their favorite foods were so simple, so strange, or so embarrassing that the staff actually tried to hide them. One president ate the same dish every day, another loved a snack that shocked foreign guests, and one had a favorite meal straight out of a frontier cabin, not a presidential kitchen. But the truth is, these foods weren't picked to impress anyone. They were the small comforts that kept them human. The tastes of childhood, the memories of home, the plate that helped them breathe through impossible days. Today, we're traveling from the very first president all the way to the men we watched on TV, revealing the one dish each leader loved most during his presidency, and the story it tells about who he really was. And if you think you know what George Washington ate, just wait. His favorite food is so humble and so personal that it might change the way you picture America's first president forever. 1. George Washington. Before he was the father of our country, George Washington was a Virginia farmer who loved simple food. And his favorite? Hoe cakes. These weren't fancy pancakes. They were flat cornmeal cakes, named because field workers used to cook them on the blades of their hoes over open fires. Washington's cook made them fresh every morning, crispy on the outside, soft inside, drizzled with butter and honey. He ate them for breakfast at Mount Vernon. He ate them during the Revolution. And even as president, when the White House kitchen could serve him anything, Washington still asked for hoe cakes. Why? Because they reminded him of home, of Virginia mornings, of a life before war and politics. And here's the kicker. Washington also had a serious sweet tooth. His ledgers show he spent more money on ice cream than almost any other food item. Yes, the first president was secretly an ice cream fanatic, but it was those golden, honey-soaked hoe cakes that kept him grounded, even when the weight of a newborn nation sat on his shoulders. 2. John Adams. John Adams never stopped being a New England farm boy. Even as the second president of the United States, sitting in the brand-new capital city, Adams craved one thing above all else: apples, fresh apples, baked apples, and his absolute favorite, apple pudding, a thick, sweet dessert made from stewed apples, breadcrumbs, sugar, and spices, baked until golden. This wasn't some exotic White House creation. It was the same dish his mother made back in Braintree, Massachusetts, when he was a kid helping his father on the farm. Adams was stubborn, fiery, and famously difficult to work with, but when he sat down to a bowl of warm apple pudding, he softened. It was like going home, even when home was hundreds of miles away. Adams once wrote that he preferred a good, honest apple to any French delicacy. And during his presidency, he made sure the White House kitchen kept barrels of them stocked year-round. Some say it was nostalgia, others say it was principle. But either way, John Adams proved you could run a country and still eat like the farm boy you'd always been. 3. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson didn't just love macaroni and cheese, he introduced it to America. And yes, we're talking about the same dish you ate as a kid, except Jefferson's version was richer, stranger, and made with a pasta machine he brought back from Europe himself. During his time as ambassador to France, Jefferson fell in love with a baked pasta dish served with cream and Parmesan. He was so obsessed, he sketched the design of an Italian pasta maker, shipped it to Monticello, and had his chef, an enslaved man named James Hemings, learn to make it from scratch. Jefferson served macaroni and cheese at state dinners. He served it to guests. He served it so often that some politicians started calling it Jefferson's dish. At the time, most Americans had never seen pasta. They thought it was weird, foreign, too fancy. But Jefferson didn't care. He loved it, and he wanted everyone else to love it too. And guess what? It worked. By the mid-1800s, macaroni and cheese had become an American staple, all because one president couldn't stop thinking about that creamy, cheesy pasta he ate in Paris. So the next time you make a box of mac and cheese, you can thank Thomas Jefferson. He didn't just write the Declaration of Independence. He gave us comfort food, too. 4. James Madison. James Madison may have been the father of the Constitution, but he had the sweet tooth of a 10-year-old. His absolute favorite dessert? Ice cream. Specifically, strawberry ice cream, served in elegant crystal bowls at White House dinners that left guests stunned. Now, this wasn't the ice cream you scoop from a carton today. In the early 1800s, making ice cream was an event. It required ice hauled from frozen rivers, stored in underground cellars, and churned by hand for hours. Madison's wife, Dolly, became famous for serving it at nearly every state function. And strawberry was always the star. But here's what made it special. Dolly didn't just serve ice cream as dessert. She made it the centerpiece. Guests would arrive at the White House expecting roast meats and potatoes, and instead they'd be greeted with towering scoops of pink, frozen sweetness. Some called it extravagant. Others called it genius. But everyone remembered it. Madison himself was a quiet, reserved man, barely over 5 feet tall and soft-spoken in crowds, but put a bowl of strawberry ice cream in front of him, and he'd smile like a kid at a county fair. It was his one indulgence, his one moment of joy in a job that demanded everything else. And honestly, that makes him more relatable than half the leaders we've had since. 5. James Monroe. James Monroe was a Virginia gentleman through and through, and his favorite dish proved it. Spoonbread, a warm, custardy cornmeal casserole that was somewhere between cornbread and pudding, soft enough to eat with a spoon, rich enough to fill you up, and comforting enough to make you forget you were running a country. Spoonbread was a Southern staple made from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and butter, baked until it puffed up like a soufflé. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't showy, but it was home. And for Monroe, who spent years serving as a diplomat in France and England, eating formal meals at royal courts, spoonbread was his way of reconnecting with Virginia soil. He requested it often during his presidency, especially during private family dinners. While state guests got elaborate roasts and French sauces, Monroe would retreat to his quarters and ask the kitchen for a simple bowl of spoonbread, sometimes topped with butter or honey. It reminded him of his childhood, of his plantation, of a time before politics consumed his life. And here's the thing. Monroe understood something most leaders forget. You can't lead a nation if you lose yourself in the process. So he held on to that warm, humble dish like a lifeline. And every time he took a bite, he was reminded of who he was before the world knew his name. 6. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was disciplined to the point of obsession. Every morning before the sun came up, he'd wake at 5 a.m., go for a swim in the Potomac River, yes, even in winter, and then sit down to the simplest breakfast imaginable: fresh fruit, a slice of bread, and maybe a bit of tea. That was it. No eggs, no bacon, no heavy plates of food. Adams believed that overeating made you sluggish, and sluggishness made you weak. He had a country to run, treaties to negotiate, and a legacy to protect. So he ate light, stayed sharp, and worked harder than almost any president before or since. Fresh apples, pears, berries, whatever was in season, became his fuel. He once wrote in his diary that a simple meal cleared the mind better than any banquet ever could. But don't mistake simplicity for lack of enjoyment. Adams loved fruit the way other men loved whiskey. He had orchards planted at the White House. He requested specific varieties from New England, and when he bit into a crisp apple on a summer morning, he wasn't just eating. He was savoring a moment of peace in a job that rarely offered any. John Quincy Adams didn't need fancy meals to feel important. He needed clarity, and for him that came in the form of a single perfect piece of fruit at dawn. 7. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was tough as nails, a war hero, a duelist, a man who once took a bullet to the chest and kept it there for the rest of his life because removing it was too much trouble. So it makes perfect sense that his favorite food was called leather breeches. This wasn't a delicate side dish. Leather breeches were green beans that had been dried, strung up, and hung to cure, sometimes for months. When it was time to eat them, you'd rehydrate them in water, then stew them low and slow with chunks of bacon, ham hock, or salt pork until they were tender and smoky. The result? A dish that tasted like survival, smoked meat, and the frontier itself. Jackson grew up poor in the Carolina backwoods, where food had to last through hard winters and long stretches between harvests. Leather breeches were a staple of that life. And even after he became president, even after he lived in the White House with access to the finest chefs in the country, Jackson still requested them. He wanted that taste of home, that reminder of where he came from. Some guests found it strange, others found it charming. But Jackson didn't care what anyone thought, which, if you know anything about Andrew Jackson, sounds about right. He ate what he wanted, how he wanted, and if you didn't like it, well, you could take it up with the man who survived a duel at dawn. 8. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was a New Yorker through and through, and his favorite food proved it. Oysters. Fresh, briny, served raw on the half-shell or fried until golden. The man couldn't get enough of them, and during his presidency he made sure barrels of them were delivered to the White House regularly, packed in ice and shipped straight from New York Harbor. In the 1830s, oysters weren't the luxury item they are today. They were everywhere, cheap, plentiful, and considered working-class food. Street vendors sold them by the dozen, saloons served them free with beer. And Van Buren, who grew up in the Hudson Valley, had been eating them since he was a boy. To him, oysters weren't just food. They were a connection to home, to the docks, to the New York he loved before Washington ever knew his name. He served them at state dinners, he ate them for lunch, and on more than one occasion he'd skip formal meals entirely just to sit down with a plate of freshly shucked oysters and a glass of wine. Some critics accused him of being too extravagant, too focused on fine dining while the country faced economic turmoil. But Van Buren didn't see it that way. To him, oysters were simple, honest, real, and in a world full of politics and performance, sometimes a man just needs something that tastes like the truth. 9. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison had the shortest presidency in American history, just 31 days before pneumonia took him. But in that brief time, one thing became clear. The man never forgot where he came from. And where he came from? The frontier, which is why his favorite food was cornmeal mush, one of the humblest dishes you could eat. Cornmeal mush was exactly what it sounds like, cornmeal boiled in water or milk until it thickened into a porridge. Sometimes it was eaten warm with butter or molasses, other times it was left to cool, sliced into slabs, and fried until crispy. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't memorable, but it was filling, cheap, and available even in the roughest frontier outposts. Harrison built his entire political campaign on being a man of the people. He was the log cabin president, the war hero who lived simply and fought hard. And cornmeal mush was part of that image, a meal that said, "I'm one of you." Even as he prepared to take the oath of office, he made sure the White House kitchen knew how to make it right. Sadly, Harrison never got to enjoy many more bowls of it. But in a way, that makes it even more powerful. His presidency was short, his life was hard, and his favorite meal was the same humble dish that kept frontier families alive through long, cold winters. Sometimes the simplest foods tell the deepest stories. 10. John Tyler. John Tyler was a proud Virginian, and nothing said Virginia quite like a perfectly cured, slow-smoked country ham. This wasn't deli-sliced lunch meat. This was the real deal, a whole ham, salt-cured for weeks, smoked over hickory or applewood, and aged until the flavor was so deep and rich it could make a grown man weep. Virginia ham had been a staple of Southern tables for generations, and Tyler grew up eating it at every major meal. Thin slices were served at breakfast with biscuits and gravy. Thick slices were the centerpiece of Sunday dinners. And during his time as president, Tyler made sure the White House kitchen always had a Virginia ham hanging in the larder, ready to be carved at a moment's notice. He served it to visiting dignitaries. He ate it during private family meals, and on more than one occasion he'd have slices sent to him in his study while working late into the night. For Tyler, Virginia ham wasn't just food, it was identity. It was a taste of the South, of tradition, of a way of life he believed in deeply. And here's the thing about a good country ham. It takes time. You can't rush the curing process. You can't fake the smoke. You can't shortcut the aging. Tyler understood that. He understood that the best things in life, whether it's food, leadership, or legacy, require patience. And maybe that's why he kept coming back to that salty, smoky slice of home. 11. James K. Polk. James K. Polk was all business, no frills, no nonsense, and his favorite meal reflected that perfectly. Cornbread and molasses, simple, filling, no apologies. Cornbread was a Southern staple, baked in cast iron until the edges were crispy and the inside stayed soft and crumbly. Polk liked his served warm, split down the middle, and drizzled with thick, dark molasses, the kind that was sweet, smoky, and stuck to your ribs. It wasn't a dish you'd serve at a state banquet, but it was the kind of meal that got you through a long day of hard work. And Polk worked harder than almost any president in history. He set 4 major goals when he took office, and he accomplished every single one of them. He expanded the nation's borders, he fought a war, he negotiated treaties, and he did it all while eating the same humble food he grew up with in Tennessee. Cornbread and molasses didn't require a chef. It didn't require fancy ingredients or complicated preparation. You mixed cornmeal, water, and salt. You baked it, you ate it, and then you got back to work. That was Polk's philosophy on everything. Keep it simple, stay focused, and don't waste time on things that don't matter. He once said he didn't believe in vacations, he didn't believe in leisure, he believed in duty. And when duty called, he answered it with a plate of cornbread and molasses in one hand and the weight of a nation in the other. 12. Zachary Taylor. Jambalaya. Zachary Taylor was a soldier before he was a president, and during his years stationed in Louisiana, fighting in the swamps and serving on the frontier, he fell in love with a dish that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Jambalaya rice, meat, vegetables, and spices, all cooked together in one big pot until the flavors melded into something smoky, spicy, and unforgettable. Jambalaya wasn't fancy. It was camp food, born out of necessity and creativity. Cajun cooks would throw in whatever they had: chicken, sausage, shrimp, pork, along with onions, peppers, celery, and tomatoes, all simmered with rice until everything soaked up the flavor. The result was a one-pot meal that could feed a whole regiment and still leave them asking for seconds. Taylor loved it so much that even after he became president, he requested it at the White House. The cooks had to learn how to make it from scratch, importing spices and techniques from the South. And when Taylor sat down to a steaming bowl of jambalaya, he wasn't in Washington anymore. He was back in Louisiana, back with his men, back in the days when life was simpler and the only thing that mattered was the next mission. But here's the twist. Taylor only served 16 months as president before he died, suddenly after eating cherries and milk at a 4th of July celebration. Some say it was cholera, others say it was food poisoning. But one thing's for sure, he never got to enjoy nearly enough bowls of that Cajun jambalaya he loved so much. 13. Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore might be one of the most forgotten presidents in American history, but his favorite food? That was unforgettable turtle soup. Yes, actual turtle, slow-cooked in a rich, dark broth with wine, herbs, and spices until the meat fell apart and the flavor was deep, earthy, and surprisingly elegant. In the mid-1800s, turtle soup was considered high society. It was served at the fanciest dinners, in the best hotels, and at exclusive clubs in cities like New York and Philadelphia. And Fillmore, who came from humble beginnings in upstate New York, loved it. To him, turtle soup was proof that he'd made it, that he'd risen from poverty to the presidency. The soup itself was an ordeal to make. Turtles were butchered, cleaned, and simmered for hours, sometimes an entire day, until the meat was tender and the broth was thick and velvety. Sherry or Madeira wine was added near the end, along with lemon, cayenne, and sometimes hard-boiled eggs. The result was a dish that tasted like tradition, refinement, and old-world luxury. Fillmore served it at White House dinners. He ordered it at restaurants. And he made sure visiting dignitaries got a taste of it, too. Some guests loved it, others found it strange and too rich. But Fillmore didn't care. For him, every bowl of turtle soup was a reminder that the poor farm boy from Buffalo had become the most powerful man in the nation. 14. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce never stopped being a New England boy. Even as president, sitting in the White House hundreds of miles from the coast, he longed for one thing above all else: fried clams, crispy, golden, salty, and served piping hot, the kind you'd get from a shack near the docks in New Hampshire. Fried clams weren't fancy. They were beach food, working-class food, the kind of meal you ate with your hands while standing on a pier watching the boats come in. But to Pierce, they were everything. They were summer afternoons as a kid. They were family gatherings. They were the taste of home before politics, before grief, before everything went wrong, and things did go wrong for Pierce. His presidency was troubled. His personal life was tragic. He and his wife lost all 3 of their children, the last one in a train accident just weeks before his inauguration. Pierce was a broken man trying to lead a broken nation. And in those dark moments, fried clams were one of the few things that brought him any comfort. He'd have them shipped to Washington when he could. Fresh clams packed in ice, delivered from the New England coast. The White House kitchen would dredge them in cornmeal and fry them until they were crisp and brown, and for just a few minutes, while he ate them, Pierce could close his eyes and pretend he was back home, back where life made sense, back before the weight of the world crushed him. 15. James Buchanan. James Buchanan was different, and his favorite food proved it. While most presidents craved meat, potatoes, or something rich and comforting, Buchanan's go-to dish was cabbage with vinaigrette. Yes, cabbage. Plain, boiled cabbage, dressed with oil, vinegar, and a bit of mustard. Guests at White House dinners were often confused. Here was the leader of the free world, serving them cabbage like it was the main event. Some thought it was eccentric. Others thought it was just plain odd. But Buchanan didn't care. He loved it, and he ate it constantly, sometimes multiple times a week. Now, cabbage wasn't exactly exotic. It was cheap, easy to grow, and stored well through the winter. But Buchanan elevated it in his own strange way. He insisted the vinaigrette be made fresh, with good oil and sharp vinegar, and he'd eat entire bowls of it alongside his other meals. Some historians think he preferred it because it was light and didn't weigh him down during long days of work. Others think he just had weird taste. Buchanan is often ranked as one of the worst presidents in history, a man who failed to stop the nation from sliding into civil war. But here's the thing. Even in his failures, even in his quirks, he stayed true to himself. He liked cabbage with vinaigrette. He didn't pretend otherwise, and in a job where everyone's watching, where every move is criticized, there's something almost admirable about a man who just eats his cabbage and moves on. 16. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a simple man with simple tastes, and his 2 favorite foods couldn't have been more different: gingerbread and corned beef. One was sweet, spiced, and reminded him of childhood. The other was salty, hearty, and kept him going through the darkest days of the Civil War. Lincoln's love for gingerbread started when he was a boy in Kentucky. His mother used to make it for him, thick, molasses-heavy cakes spiced with ginger and cinnamon. Even as president, Lincoln would request gingerbread from the White House kitchen, often eating it late at night while reviewing maps and battle reports. It was comfort in a bite. A memory of simpler times before the weight of a divided nation rested on his shoulders. But when it came to real meals, Lincoln relied on corned beef salted, cured beef that could last for weeks without spoiling. It was served cold, sliced thin, and eaten straight from the plate, sometimes with bread, sometimes alone. Lincoln wasn't a big eater. He'd often forget meals entirely, lost in thought or buried in paperwork. But when he did eat, Corned beef was his go-to, quick, filling, no fuss. There's a famous story about Lincoln eating cold corned beef at midnight, sitting alone in his office, staring at casualty lists from the war. He didn't have time for fancy dinners. He didn't have energy for elaborate meals. He had a country to save, and gingerbread and corned beef were all he needed to keep going. 17, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson grew up dirt poor in North Carolina and Tennessee, where food wasn't about flavor, it was about survival. And his favorite dish, Hoppin' John, was proof of that. Black-eyed peas, rice, bacon, onions, and a little bit of salt, all cooked together in one pot until everything softened and the flavors mixed into something warm, smoky, and filling. Hoppin' John was a Southern staple, especially among working-class families who couldn't afford meat every day. The black-eyed peas provided protein, the rice stretched the meal, and the bacon, even just a small piece, gave it enough flavor to make you forget you were eating poor man's food. Some families ate it on New Year's Day for good luck. Others, like Johnson's, ate it whenever they could afford the ingredients. Even after he became president, taking over after Lincoln's assassination, Johnson never forgot where he came from. He requested Hoppin' John at the White House, much to the confusion of the kitchen staff, who were used to preparing elaborate French dishes, but Johnson didn't want fancy. He wanted real. He wanted the food that kept him alive when he had nothing. His presidency was controversial. He clashed with Congress. He barely avoided impeachment. But through it all, he held on to that one simple dish. And every time he ate it, he was reminded of the boy who stitched clothes for pennies, who taught himself to read, who clawed his way up from nothing. Hoppin' John wasn't just food. It was proof that he'd survived. 18. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was a hard man, a general who won the Civil War through sheer grit and relentless determination, a president who tried to hold a fractured nation together during Reconstruction. But when it came to food, Grant had a surprising weakness: rice pudding. Sweet, creamy, comforting rice pudding. This wasn't some elaborate dessert. It was simple: white rice simmered in milk with sugar, cinnamon, and sometimes a handful of raisins, baked until thick and custard-like. Grant loved it so much that he requested it constantly, both during his military campaigns and later at the White House. His wife, Julia, made sure the kitchen always had it ready for him. Some say Grant's love for rice pudding came from his childhood in Ohio, where his mother made it as a treat. Others say it reminded him of simpler times before war, before politics, before everything got so complicated. But whatever the reason, rice pudding became his comfort food, the one thing that could calm him down after a long, brutal day. And Grant had plenty of brutal days. He drank too much. He trusted the wrong people. His presidency was marred by scandals he didn't see coming. But through it all, he'd retreat to the kitchen, ask for a bowl of rice pudding, and for just a few minutes, he wasn't the president or the general. He was just a man who liked something sweet. 19. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes didn't have the most exciting presidency. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't controversial. He was steady, reliable, and maybe a little boring, which is exactly how he liked his breakfast: corned beef hash. Chopped corned beef, diced potatoes, onions, all fried together in a skillet until crispy and golden. Corned beef hash was the ultimate leftovers meal. You took yesterday's corned beef, diced it up, mixed it with whatever potatoes you had lying around, and fried it in butter or bacon grease until it formed a crispy crust. Top it with a fried egg, and you had a breakfast that could power you through the morning, no matter how stressful the day ahead. Hayes ate it almost every morning during his time in office. The White House kitchen knew his order by heart: corned beef hash, cooked crispy, with 2 eggs on top and a side of toast. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't memorable, but it was consistent. And for a man trying to restore dignity to a presidency after the chaos of Grant's scandals, consistency mattered. Hayes also banned alcohol from the White House. His wife, Lucy, was nicknamed Lemonade Lucy because of it. So, while other presidents were known for their wine cellars or whiskey collections, Hayes was known for his corned beef hash and his dry dinners. Some called him dull. But Hayes didn't care. He knew who he was, and he started every day the same way, with a hot skillet, a crispy hash, and the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. 20. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield grew up in deep rural Ohio, and no matter how far life carried him, from canal boat worker to Civil War general to the presidency, he never forgot the flavors of home. His favorite dish during his short presidency was squirrel stew, a frontier classic made from slow-simmered squirrel meat, vegetables, broth, and whatever seasonings a family had on hand. To some visitors, the idea of serving squirrel in the White House sounded outrageous. But to Garfield, it wasn't strange at all. He'd eaten it his entire life. For poor farming families, squirrel was reliable, plentiful, and surprisingly tender when cooked low and slow. It tasted like survival, and like childhood. The White House kitchen prepared it the way Garfield remembered: browned meat, hearty potatoes, onions, maybe a few herbs, all simmered into a thick, warming stew. Garfield loved it because it was honest food, simple, unpretentious, and tied to the people he came from. Even as president, tackling some of the era's biggest national challenges, Garfield found comfort in that humble bowl of stew. It reminded him of who he was before fame and politics changed everything. 21. Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur was known for his immaculate style, silk vests, tailored suits, and sideburns so iconic they practically had their own zip code, so it's no surprise that his favorite food during his presidency matched that same bold personality: mutton chops. Not the facial hair, actual thick, juicy cuts of sheep, roasted or broiled until the outside browned and the inside stayed tender. Arthur had expensive tastes and wasn't shy about it. He loved rich meats, lavish dinners, and plates that made a statement the moment they hit the table. Mutton chops were his signature. The White House kitchen served them often, paired with potatoes or gravy, and sometimes even late at night after Arthur returned from social events, visitors noticed his appetite. Arthur was a refined man, but he liked his meals hearty and satisfying. And mutton chops reminded him of the upscale New York restaurants he frequented before taking office, places where businessmen talked politics over heavy plates of roasted meat. In a presidency marked by elegance and quiet reform, this dish was the one indulgence he never gave up. 22. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was a big man with big appetites, and nothing satisfied him quite like corned beef and cabbage, not fancy, not expensive, not presidential, and that was exactly the point. It was the hearty working-class meal he'd grown up eating in upstate New York, long before he became a sheriff, a governor, and finally, President of the United States. Cleveland loved the salty, tender slices of corned beef simmered with soft cabbage, potatoes, and onions. It was the kind of meal you could smell cooking from clear across the house. When the White House kitchen made it, everyone knew. Its aroma drifted through hallways, clung to coats, and welcomed Cleveland the moment he walked in from long meetings. People sometimes teased him for preferring such a humble dish, especially at a time when presidents were expected to eat refined Victorian meals. But Cleveland didn't care. He was a man of direct words and direct tastes. Corned beef and cabbage reminded him of taverns, busy immigrant neighborhoods, and honest, everyday Americans trying to make a life in a growing nation. And with Cleveland, we're only halfway through, because his favorite meal returns again later in the list. 23. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison might have looked prim and proper in photos, but his favorite food during his presidency was anything but refined. He loved roast opossum. Yes, opossum, a dish so unusual that visiting dignitaries weren't always sure if it was a joke or a test of courage. Harrison grew up in rural Indiana, where opossum was a genuine farmhouse delicacy. Families would trap them in winter, feed them corn for a few days to sweeten the meat, then roast them slowly with sweet potatoes until the whole house filled with a rich, savory aroma. Young Benjamin grew up on it, and that childhood taste never left him. So when he moved into the White House, he asked the kitchen to prepare it just the way he remembered, roasted whole, skin crisp, meat tender, served with baked sweet potatoes on each side. Some guests gave polite smiles, others stared. One reportedly whispered, "Is this normal?" Harrison simply carved another slice and enjoyed every bite. To him, it wasn't strange. It was home. Indiana winters, big family tables, and comfort born from simple traditions. 24. William McKinley. William McKinley had a calm, gentle personality, and his favorite comfort during his presidency matched that warmth perfectly: a simple cup of hot chocolate. Not the sugary instant kind we know today. This was rich, dark, old-fashioned drinking chocolate, whisked slowly with milk and sometimes sweetened with just a touch of sugar. McKinley drank it the way some presidents drank whiskey, regularly, intentionally, and often as a way to steady himself before long meetings. The stresses of his era were enormous: economic change, foreign conflict, national expansion. But when a steaming cup of chocolate arrived on his desk, everything slowed down. He loved it so much that the White House staff always kept cocoa on hand, and it wasn't unusual for McKinley to sip a cup late at night while reviewing papers or meeting with advisors. Visitors sometimes found it charming, a president drinking hot chocolate like a schoolboy. But to McKinley, it was comfort. It was warmth. It was a small kindness in a demanding world. Sometimes he paired it with a slice of meat or a roll, but the chocolate itself was the star. 25. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt lived like a man carved out of pure energy, and his favorite food during his presidency matched that iron-willed spirit perfectly: a thick slab of steak and a cup of black coffee strong enough to wake a charging bull. Roosevelt didn't nibble or sip. He attacked his meals the same way he attacked life: boldly, quickly, and with absolute conviction. As a rancher in the Dakota Badlands, Roosevelt learned to eat hearty frontier meals. Steak wasn't a luxury to him. It was fuel for the long rides, hunting trips, and rough work that shaped him into the Rough Rider the nation came to admire. When he moved into the White House, he brought that appetite with him. The staff knew the drill: serve the steak thick, hot, and unadorned. Roosevelt didn't want fancy sauces or delicate seasonings. Just meat. Real meat. And alongside it, a cup of black coffee so bitter and powerful it could practically stand on its own. This simple, rugged pairing kept him going through early morning meetings, afternoon battles with Congress, and long nights shaping modern America. 26. William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft didn't just enjoy food, he celebrated it. And the dish he adored most during his presidency was turtle soup, a rich, velvety, old-world delicacy that matched his famously hearty appetite. While Millard Fillmore enjoyed it as a luxury, Taft loved it as a regular comfort. If it appeared on the menu, you could be sure Taft was smiling. Turtle soup in Taft's era was a culinary event. The broth simmered for hours with herbs, vegetables, and sherry, turning dark and deeply flavored. Small pieces of tender meat floated in the bowl, and the steam carried a warm, savory aroma that filled the White House dining room. Taft would enjoy it with gusto, often as the opening dish to an already generous meal. For him, turtle soup wasn't just fancy food. It reminded him of the grand hotel dining rooms he frequented before becoming president, as well as the lavish banquets he enjoyed while serving as governor and judge. It was rich, indulgent, comforting, everything he loved in a meal. And Taft never apologized for enjoying it. He ate with enthusiasm, with joy, and with zero pretense. 27. Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson may have been a scholar, a professor, and a president who thought in long, complicated sentences, but when it came to food, he preferred something simple and almost surprisingly light: chicken salad. Not the creamy, heavy kind we know today, but a delicate, early 20th century version made with diced chicken, celery, herbs, and just a whisper of dressing. Wilson wasn't a big eater, and heavy meals made him sluggish. So during his presidency, chicken salad became his go-to dish, something he could enjoy quickly between meetings, speeches, and the endless paperwork of wartime leadership. Served cold, scooped onto lettuce, or paired with a roll, it kept him fueled without weighing him down. This simple dish also reminded him of the polite Southern cooking he grew up with in Virginia and Georgia, where meals were light, neat, and refined. Even White House guests noticed his modest tastes. Diplomatic dinners became famous for being shorter and simpler when Wilson preferred chicken over anything extravagant. For a president navigating the chaos of World War I, chicken salad was the calm in the storm, steady, predictable, and quietly comforting. 28. Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding may have been a public charmer and a private mystery, but when it came to his favorite food during his presidency, there was nothing mysterious at all. He adored chicken pot pie. Warm, creamy, packed with tender chicken and vegetables under a flaky golden crust, it was the kind of meal that made the world feel safe. For a few minutes, Harding grew up in rural Ohio, where pot pies weren't just Sunday dinners. They were family events. His wife, Florence Harding, was a strong and influential First Lady, and her personal recipe for chicken pot pie was legendary. When Harding reached the White House, she made sure it followed him there. Visitors and staff often smelled it long before they saw it. The buttery crust, the savory steam, the bubbling gravy. It all drifted through the presidential hallways like a warm hug. Harding, who carried the stress of scandals, political pressure, and poor health, often found relief in this comforting dish. It reminded him of his hometown, his family table, and a slower, kinder America. For Harding, chicken pot pie wasn't just food. It was therapy. 29. Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was known as Silent Cal, the man who spoke only when absolutely necessary. His food choices fit that same quiet simplicity. During his presidency, his favorite combination, one that baffled guests and amused staff, was pickles and applesauce. Yes, together, on the same plate, often at the same time. Coolidge grew up on a Vermont farm, where meals were plain, practical, and built around whatever the family had stored for winter. Pickles added tang. Applesauce added sweetness. And together they made a frugal, no-nonsense pairing that Coolidge carried with him all the way to the White House. Staff members said he ate them with the same calm, steady rhythm he brought to every part of his life. While others enjoyed roasts or rich Victorian dishes, Coolidge sat quietly with a spoonful of applesauce and a crisp pickle spear, completely content. Some visitors tried it out of politeness, and later admitted they couldn't imagine how the president enjoyed it so much. But to Coolidge, it wasn't strange. It was home. Childhood suppers in a wooden farmhouse kitchen, long winters, and the comfort of simple New England traditions. 30. Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover entered the White House at one of the toughest times in American history, and his favorite food reflected something rare in those years: sweetness, comfort, and a bit of childhood joy. His top dish during his presidency was sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows, warm, soft, caramelized, and baked until the top turned golden and gooey. Hoover grew up in a strict Quaker household where treats were limited, but holidays always included baked sweet potatoes. When marshmallows became a popular ingredient in the early 1900s, Hoover quickly fell in love with the combination. By the time he became president, the dish had become a staple at his table. During the early years of the Great Depression, Hoover often preferred simple, familiar meals instead of elaborate spreads. Sweet potatoes with marshmallows reminded him of family holidays, community dinners, and brief moments of warmth in a childhood marked by hardship and orphanhood. For a man carrying the weight of a nation in crisis, the dish offered a rare moment of sweetness, literally and emotionally. It was a taste of hope in a dark time. 31. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt led America through the Great Depression and World War II, yet his favorite food during his presidency was almost shockingly simple: a grilled cheese sandwich. No fancy fillings, no exotic cheeses, just good bread, melted American cheese, and a hot griddle, comfort in its purest form. FDR loved the way the sandwich brought him back to lighter days, long before politics and war became his daily reality. The warmth, the crisp edges, the gooey cheese. It reminded him of childhood summers in Hyde Park and easy lunches shared with his mother. Even as the world changed around him, grilled cheese stayed the same. The White House kitchen got so used to his requests that they kept a griddle ready almost all the time. Staff members said he ate grilled cheese during stressful wartime briefings, between cabinet meetings, or late at night when the weight of the world felt unbearable. This simple sandwich became a kind of anchor for him, something steady, warm, and utterly American. In hindsight, it makes sense. When you carry the burdens of a nation, sometimes the smallest comforts are the ones that hold you together. 32. Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman was as plain-spoken as presidents come, direct, practical, and rooted in the values of his Missouri upbringing, and nothing reflected that better than his favorite food during his presidency: fried chicken. Crispy, golden, sizzling fried chicken, the kind his mother used to make on Sundays. Truman loved home cooking, and fried chicken was his anchor. The White House kitchen prepared it exactly the way he liked: well-seasoned, pan-fried in cast iron, with a crust that crackled when you bit into it. He didn't care for fancy sauces or modern twists. He wanted the real thing, the kind served at church picnics, family gatherings, and small-town diners across the Midwest. Visitors were sometimes surprised to see such a humble dish on the presidential menu, but Truman believed good food didn't need to be complicated. After long days handling post-war challenges, rebuilding Europe, and making some of the hardest decisions in presidential history, a plate of fried chicken felt like home for Truman. That first crunchy bite wasn't just a meal. It was a reminder of simpler times, of family, and of the America he felt he was fighting to protect. 33. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower was a soldier long before he was a president, and he carried that practicality right into the White House. His favorite food during his presidency was beef stew, hearty, simple, slow-cooked, and here's the part most people don't know: Ike liked to cook it himself. Even while commanding armies or navigating Cold War tensions, Eisenhower would slip into the White House kitchen, roll up his sleeves, and start chopping onions and browning beef like it was second nature. His recipe was famous among staff: big chunks of beef, potatoes, onions, carrots, plenty of black pepper, and hours of slow simmering until the stew turned rich and deep. This wasn't a dish meant to impress foreign leaders. It was comfort food, plain and honest, the kind Eisenhower had eaten his whole life, from Kansas childhood dinners to mess hall meals in the Army. Cooking it gave him a rare sense of calm, a few quiet moments in a job with almost none. Staff members said that when the smell of Ike's stew filled the White House, you knew the president was taking a moment for himself. 34. John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy may have been the first modern television-era president, but his favorite food was deeply traditional: New England clam chowder. Creamy, warm, briny, and packed with potatoes and tender clams, it was the taste of Massachusetts, the taste of home. JFK grew up sailing along the New England coast, spending summers in Hyannisport, breathing in ocean air that never really left his memory. And every time he had a bowl of clam chowder, he was instantly transported back to those days. It wasn't fancy cuisine, it wasn't political, it was personal. White House staff noted that chowder was often served on Fridays, usually with crackers and a bit of pepper on top. Kennedy preferred it simple. No extra herbs, no modern twists, just the classic recipe he'd eaten his entire life. Guests at the White House sometimes found it surprising that the young, glamorous president still craved an old-fashioned regional dish. But that was the point. For Kennedy, clam chowder was grounding. Amid the pressures of the Cold War and the spotlight of a nation, it reminded him of waves, family gatherings, and steady New England traditions. 35. Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson was Texas through and through, and he brought that Lone Star appetite straight into the White House. His favorite food during his presidency wasn't fancy, delicate, or served in tiny portions. It was Texas-style barbecue. Smoky, peppery, slow-cooked brisket that fell apart under your fork. LBJ loved barbecue so much that he held massive cookouts on the White House lawn, complete with pitmasters, live fires, and the unmistakable smell of mesquite smoke drifting across Washington. D.C. guests were stunned. Presidents before him served French-inspired dinners. LBJ served brisket, beans, and pickles, and he served it proudly. His favorite was simple: thick slices of brisket, smoked low and slow, with a little sauce on the side and a cold glass of iced tea. It reminded him of ranch life, wide Texas skies, and long days talking politics over outdoor meals with friends and family. For a president dealing with Vietnam, civil rights battles, and national turmoil, barbecue was his escape, bold, honest, and full of homegrown comfort. 36. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had one of the strangest presidential favorite foods on record, a combination so unusual that it still gets jokes today. During his presidency, his go-to dish was cottage cheese topped with ketchup. Yes, ketchup. Nixon ate it constantly. Breakfast, lunch, light dinners. The man truly loved it. He believed cottage cheese was healthy, high protein, and good for digestion. But the ketchup? That was pure personal taste. He liked the sweet tang, the contrast, the way it mixed with the creamy curds. Staff members said he would sit in the Oval Office, spoon in hand, enjoying this unusual dish while reading reports or preparing speeches. Visitors were bewildered. Foreign dignitaries would politely pretend not to notice. Some aides even admitted trying it out of curiosity and immediately regretting it. But Nixon didn't care what anyone thought. It was familiar, it was simple, and it reminded him of the frugal meals he grew up with in California during tougher times. In a presidency filled with pressure and controversy, this odd little bowl of cottage cheese and ketchup was Nixon's strange comfort food. 37. Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was one of the most down-to-earth presidents America ever had, and his favorite food during his presidency reflected that wholesome Midwestern spirit perfectly. Pot roast, slow-cooked, tender, richly seasoned beef surrounded by carrots, onions, and potatoes, the kind of Sunday dinner that fills a whole house with warmth. Ford grew up in Michigan, where pot roast was more than a meal. It was a family ritual. When he moved into the White House, he brought that tradition with him. The kitchen staff prepared it the classic way, searing the beef first for flavor, then letting it simmer for hours until it practically melted apart. Whenever the pot roast hit the table, Ford relaxed. After long days dealing with economic challenges and rebuilding trust in government, this simple, hearty dish reminded him of home: football games, family gatherings, and meals shared around a busy kitchen table. Even guests noticed how much he enjoyed it. Pot roast was served often, and Ford never hid his enthusiasm. It was comfort food at its finest, steady, honest, and deeply American. 38. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter grew up on a peanut farm in rural Georgia, and no matter how far life carried him, from the Navy to the governor's mansion to the White House, he never let go of the Southern breakfast that shaped his childhood. Grits, warm, creamy, simple grits, sometimes with butter, sometimes with cheese, sometimes plain, but always comforting. Carter didn't eat for show, he ate for honesty, and grits were as honest as it gets. The White House kitchen quickly learned that if they wanted to make the president smile in the morning, a bowl of hot grits was the way to do it. Carter often paired them with eggs or a slice of toast, just like he had growing up. He once joked that grits kept him grounded, a small reminder of Plains, Georgia, where the world was quiet, the land stretched wide, and breakfast came before chores. For a president dealing with energy crises, diplomatic challenges, and national anxiety, grits were a return to steadiness. Some guests found it modest for a presidential meal, but that was exactly the point. Carter was a farm boy at heart, and grits were home. 39. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's presidency was filled with speeches, charm, and Cold War pressure, but his favorite treat was something small, colorful, and almost childlike: jelly beans. He didn't just like them, he adored them. Reagan believed the chewy little candies helped him quit smoking years earlier, and by the time he reached the White House, they'd become his signature snack jars of jelly beans were placed in meeting rooms, on his desk, aboard Air Force One, even in cabinet meetings. He preferred the gourmet kind, especially black licorice and fruit flavors, and he'd often grab a handful before diving into long briefings. Staff members said the click of jelly beans hitting a glass jar became part of the soundtrack of his presidency. Foreign leaders were amused, reporters loved it, and Americans embraced the image of their president enjoying candy during high-stakes negotiations. The Jelly Belly Company even created a custom blue color just for him. For Reagan, jelly beans weren't childish. They were comfort, a small, sweet distraction in a world filled with enormous decisions. 40. George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush may have been a World War II pilot, a diplomat, and a seasoned statesman, but when it came to his favorite food during his presidency, he preferred something as simple and crunchy as a Saturday afternoon snack: pork rinds, salty, crispy, airy pork rinds, the kind you grab from a bag and munch without thinking. Bush loved them so much that when he mentioned it during his 1988 campaign, pork rind sales across America shot up. Suddenly, every grocery store was stocking them front and center. He especially enjoyed them sprinkled with Tabasco or paired with a cold drink. To some, it seemed strange that a man of such high office enjoyed something so down-to-earth. But that was the point. Pork rinds reminded Bush of Texas life, of casual gatherings, of baseball games and road trips, and everyday moments far away from speeches and ceremonies. The White House staff kept them in the pantry, and Bush often reached for a handful during long briefings or late-night reading. It was his way of staying grounded, crunchy, familiar comfort in a demanding world. 41. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had a famously hearty appetite, and while he loved all kinds of comfort food, one dish topped the list during his presidency: chicken enchiladas, spicy, cheesy, warm, and packed with flavor. They were everything he craved after long days of meetings, travel, and political battles. Clinton grew up in Arkansas, where Southern food reigned, but he developed a deep love for Tex-Mex and Southwestern dishes as he got older. By the time he reached the White House, chicken enchiladas were a regular request. The staff prepared them the classic way: soft tortillas filled with shredded chicken, rolled tight, covered in rich red sauce, topped with melted cheese, and baked until bubbling. When a plate of enchiladas came out of the kitchen, Clinton lit up. He often paired them with rice, beans, and a cold drink, and he wasn't shy about going back for seconds. Even officials and foreign guests noticed. If enchiladas were on the menu, it was probably because the president asked for them. For Clinton, the dish was pure comfort, warm, familiar, and full of the bold flavors he loved. 42. George W. Bush. George W. Bush grew up in Texas, surrounded by big flavors and bigger personalities, but during his presidency, his favorite food combined two classic American staples into one unforgettable dish: cheeseburger pizza. Yes, pizza topped with ground beef, onions, pickles, cheese, and sometimes even a drizzle of ketchup and mustard. Bush loved casual, hearty foods, and this one hit all the right notes. It was fun, familiar, and tasted like a backyard cookout smashed together with a Friday pizza night. When the White House kitchen learned how much he liked it, they added it to the rotation, especially for casual meals or family dinners. Staff members later shared that Bush's eyes would light up whenever cheeseburger pizza appeared on the menu. It reminded him of home, Texas weekends, baseball games, and relaxed dinners with friends. In a job filled with constant pressure, this quirky, comfort-heavy dish allowed him a moment of pure nostalgia. Foreign guests didn't always understand it. Some even thought it was a joke. But Bush didn't care. It was fun food, made for a man who loved simple pleasures. 43. Barack Obama. Barack Obama had access to world-class chefs, rare ingredients, and any dish he could dream of. But his favorite food during his presidency was something far more personal, his own homemade chili. A recipe he'd been cooking since his college days, simple, spicy, comforting, and full of memories. Obama's chili wasn't fancy: ground turkey or beef, onions, garlic, kidney beans, peppers, cumin, oregano, and just enough heat to make it interesting. He loved it because it tasted like home, like his early years balancing work and school, like the meals he made for Michelle long before the Oval Office was ever in view. Even in the White House, he requested it often. The staff learned his recipe and cooked it exactly the way he liked it, but every now and then Obama would roll up his sleeves and prepare it himself, just to reconnect with something normal. The smell of chili simmering on the stove was a rare and comforting aroma in a place usually thick with politics. For Obama, that warm, hearty bowl wasn't just food, it was grounding, familiar, a reminder of where he'd come from and who he'd always be. 44. Donald Trump. Donald Trump's presidency sparked endless debates, but one thing was never debated at all: his favorite meal. He loved well-done steak, cooked until no pink remained, and served with a generous side of ketchup. Not a drizzle, not a dab, a full serving. Trump didn't hide this preference. He ordered his steak well done at restaurants long before entering the White House, and he kept the habit during his presidency. To food critics, it was shocking. To Trump, it was comfort. He liked his steak exactly the way he wanted it, even if the culinary world raised an eyebrow. White House chefs quickly learned the routine: thick-cut steak, heavily seasoned, cooked until firm, then served with a bottle of ketchup nearby. No fancy sauces, no rare preparation, no experiments, just consistency, something Trump valued deeply in all areas of his life. He often ate it during working dinners, campaign strategy sessions, or late nights in the private residence. For him, the combination tasted like familiarity and control in a world of constant unpredictability. And now we've reached the final president on our list, a lifelong public servant with a love for simple red sauce comfort food. 45. Joe Biden. Joe Biden has traveled the world, met kings and prime ministers, and tasted dishes from every corner of the globe. But when it comes to his favorite food during his presidency, he always returns to something warm, familiar, and deeply rooted in family tradition: spaghetti with red sauce, not gourmet pasta, not an elaborate Italian feast, just simple spaghetti topped with a hearty tomato sauce, the kind served at family tables across America. Biden grew up in a tight-knit Irish-American household where big pots of red sauce simmered on the stove and Sunday dinners brought everyone together. That memory never left him. During his presidency, the White House kitchen often prepared spaghetti exactly the way he liked it: classic, straightforward, and comforting. Sometimes with meatballs, sometimes without. Always with extra sauce. Staff members said it reminded him of sharing meals with his parents, siblings, and his own children as they grew up. For a man who carries his heart on his sleeve, food isn't just fuel, it's connection. Spaghetti and red sauce taste like home, like warmth, like the people he's loved and lost and the family he continues to cherish. And now you've seen every president's favorite food, from frontier stews to jelly beans to humble bowls of pasta. So after all these meals, after turtle soup and jelly beans, steak and ketchup, squirrel stew, clam chowder, and bowls of simple spaghetti, one thing becomes crystal clear. Our presidents weren't just names in textbooks. They were people. Real people with cravings, comforts, childhood memories, and late-night habits just like the rest of us. Behind every policy, every speech, every moment in history, there was a dinner table, there was a favorite dish, there was a taste of home. And sometimes that simple plate of food said more about a president's heart than any biography ever could, because food isn't just food. It's where we come from. It's who we love. It's the story that stays with us long after the job is done.